Okay, okay, guys. So I introduce Billy. Billy, he is a lead environment artist in Ubisoft Toronto, but he's also a professor in George Brown College, and he will show his projects from Far Cry 4 and probably other stuff. He work all the night, so give him the right satisfaction.
Thank you. Hello, how's everyone doing? Okay? All right. All right. I'm not going to be too long because I know people must be tired from all the presentations in the morning. So I'll keep it short and sweet. And I know you guys want to get to jamming, so let's begin. First, just a little introduction on myself. My name is Billy. I'm a lead environment artist at Ubisoft. I've been there for about 7 years. During my time there, I've worked on Splinter Cell Blacklist, Far Cry 4. Short time spent on Assassin's Creed Chronicles to help ship. I worked on Far Cry Primal, and currently I'm working on Far Cry 5, which is set to release in February. So before that, I worked in mobile games and in the serious game space. Does anyone know what serious games are? Some of you? Yeah? So for those that don't, serious games are anything that is not specifically for entertainment purposes. So, medical training, real estate visualization, and my Apple Watch, for example, tracks my progress during the day, and it tells me how I'm doing compared to yesterday or compared to last week. Or your Nike Run Band will compare your score against other people who run also. These are things that many people really don't classify as games, but it's just these game principles that are applied to the different areas of the world. So I worked a bit on that. I worked on for a company called Spinal Cord Injury University, where we created an app to help people cope with spinal cord injuries, and it was kind of like a Facebook for a community of people that had spinal cord injuries. We also did an app for a hospital in Toronto, which trained staff on how to properly wash themselves when they finish their shift, how to properly wash themselves before they start, and it turned it into like a little game. So when you checked all the boxes, you got your score, and you were able to punch out. So the reason why I'm saying that is because there's a bunch of applications that we can pull from games and apply to different areas of the world. There's a bunch of things that we experiment with games, very, very early on, and they eventually, years later, make their ways into mass market. Virtual reality, for example, is something that's been in video games for years. If you guys remember Virtual Boy, which was Nintendo's failed console, 15 or so years ago, we were experimenting with virtual reality, and augmented reality has been a number of years now where we've been playing with augmented reality kind of as a companion app for a game, or just like small toys, which now is built right into the new iPhone. So these are things that we experiment with games long before they make their way into mass market. And also, I came from a academic background, game specific. So I went to George Brown College, where I now teach in the game development program. And so, like many of you, I know exactly the position some of you might be in as far as studying for games and trying to get into the games industry, whether you want to start your own company or maybe you want to work for a AAA company. So I've kind of worked in many of those spaces. So if you guys ever want to chat or want some advice, or if you just like to kind of get some information on Ubisoft or in the indie space, we can chat. Feel free to approach me and we'll chat. So these are a bit of the contents of the presentation. So we'll talk about who is Ubisoft. Art at Ubisoft Toronto, so art at a AAA studio, let's classify it as that. How the pipeline works in a AAA environment. Then we'll talk about the disciplines, what makes a successful artist at Ubisoft, what makes a successful portfolio, art specific, because that's my specialization. And we'll talk about just some small tips on how to have a successful game jam so that you're not stressed with trying to do too much or putting your focus in the wrong areas. Just some tips, because I've done a number of game jams myself, and I've moderated a couple game jams as well. So first, Ubisoft, for those that don't know. It was founded in 1986 by a couple brothers in Paris, France. It's the third largest independent publisher, developer, and distributor of video games worldwide. We've got about 10,000 people around the world in 29 countries. I got to meet some of my colleagues from UB Milan today, which is cool because no matter where I go, I seem to meet people who work for Ubisoft, so it's kind of fun. 80% of our studio is production, so that's content production, so creative, design, art, animation, audio, that sort of thing. 20% is business and support, so marketing, human resources, that kind of thing. Our average developer age is 33 years old, so I'm right there. Many of you are far younger. So these are some of the brands that we work on at UB Toronto. So we've worked on Assassin's Creed. We've worked on a number of Far Cry iterations, Watch Dogs, Splinter Cell Blacklist, which was actually my first project. When I joined the studio on Blacklist, actually, there was about 3 artists in the studio. It was on Blacklist. We were also working on Rainbow Six at the time. And there was about 3 artists on Blacklist, and it was kind of cool to kind of be there in pre-production with my, on my first AAA game, big budget game, to see that from like what it was when it started in conception and what it blossomed to be. We worked on The Division. We helped out a little bit on The Division in Toronto. We've also sent people to Sweden to work with Massive on The Division. And we've worked on For Honor, our cinematics team namely, and some of our cinematics artists. So Ubisoft Toronto, we were established in 2010. I joined a few months after we were established. Right now we have about 640 people at the studio, which is crazy because 640 is a big number, but we work really closely with our Montreal studio, and they have close to 3,000 people in one building. So although we're 640 plus right now, it still feels like a small studio, as strange as that seems. We have a partnership with the Ontario government to grow to 800 by 2020, so that's our mandate. We're going to be at least 800 people by 2020. So lots of opportunity for some of you guys if you're interested. We earned Canada's Top Employer in 2017 for the 2nd year in a row. Our E3 2017 announcement of Starlink was the first new IP that was completely concepted and developed from the ground up in Toronto. Like, we've worked on Blacklist, that was already an established, Splinter Cell was an established franchise. This is the first IP that was conceptualized after Blacklist. Small teams were formed to start conceptualizing some different games. One of them was Starlink, which is, again, really cool to see what it started as in its infancy and what it is now, and eventually when it ships. And these are some of the games we've worked on. We also have a really cool, huge performance capture studio, which is really cutting edge. We have photogrammetry set up, which I'll talk about in a bit, what photogrammetry is if you guys don't know. How many artists are in here, by the way? Artists, animators. Cool. All right. Okay, so art at UB. So what is video game art? I mean, it's a pretty broad spectrum. Like, there's a lot of spectrums that are associated with video game art. Depending on where you work, like if you work at a AAA studio, you may have very specialized roles. Like if someone is working as a concept artist, they may be doing just concept work for the duration of a project. From the beginning of the project, where they're most crucial, helping to concept the project, to kind of give the project an identity, to inspire the team. If you are starting your own studio or you're working for a small studio, you may have a concept artist helping out with textures, helping out with modeling, depending on where his actual skill set lies. You might be doing, multiple things. My colleague and friend at the back, Paul Lely, is our concept artist at UB Toronto. So some of these may be some of his works of art over here. But with concept art, I mean, like some of the misconceptions about concept art, I feel like some of the misconceptions with concept art, I feel like some people might have is, and this is especially with new junior artists that come to the studio, is you might feel like every single piece that you make has to be that magazine portfolio piece. But about 95% of the concept pieces that are made are super utility pieces, meaning they're to help the artist move forward. They're done in half a day, a few hours, maybe a day maximum. right? So a lot of these pieces, like in the bottom left, for example, some of these concept pieces for, early Starlink exploration, were just very much to kind of get a sense of how the ship's going to be built, how we're going to build a ship, how the ship's going to get pieced together. And these are things that, they're not meant to be seen by anybody other than the person who's building that thing. Some of the other pieces, like in the top left, are mood pieces. These are, again, they take a day long, just to give you a sense of what's the color palette of this section, what's the mood like to inspire the team to move forward. That's basically, concepts, general thrust. They're the engine. They're trying to get the thing started, right? And then, we also have our beautiful pieces that you'll see, released to the press. These are concept pieces that are later touched up, or we put more time into them to really, make it a complete art piece. Modeling and texture artist. So this is where I started. Also, again, another misconception with modeling and texturing. Generally, in a AAA studio, in our studio anyways, modelers will texture and texture artists will model as well. The difference is when you're starting out in a production, you'll have the texture artists generally making the large-scale base textures for the world. So the ground, the brick wall, the stucco, the sand that's going to be on the beach. They're going to be making these general base textures. But if they end up making the building, they might end up just modeling the building themselves, depending on where we are in production, who's working on what. We're just going to divvy out the work. So generally, you can specialize. I mean, we have really amazing texture artists that are so good at what they do that that's all we have them do. But that's few and far between from the actual generalists, where when there's a modeling task, you model. When there's a texture task, you texture. And that's where I kind of fit in. I was just kind of, whatever needed to be done at the time, I did. Then there's level and world artists. So this is where I kind of moved into. This is basically like modeling and texturing. This is generally where like a modeler or a texture artist will move into after they have some experience and they're able to take on a larger chunk. Basically, a level and world artist at Ubisoft will own a section. So let's imagine that this campus was a level in a game, and I was the level artist. I would own the section of the game, meaning I would need to kind of say, okay, I need someone to help me with the exterior building. I need someone to help me with the interior. I'm going to work on that room. You're going to work on this room, based on what we need to get done first. So we'll work in stages. We'll block things out. We'll get things proportional. We'll get things feeling good. The flow will work. Design will be happy. We'll move forward with a first pass for art to get an intention. At that point, concept will come back in. Now that we've started messing with the layout, messing with the design, concept will come in. They'll give us another mood piece to help propel us forward again past the next gate. So we work in these broad strokes. We don't like get too detailed focus in one, unless we're doing a specific benchmark or a demo. Maybe we need to prove out this new rendering engine that we just built. We need to prove that out with a benchmark to see how far we can go with, how many things we can draw on the screen, how high resolution our textures or our geometry could be. But basically, at this stage here, you're kind of owning a section. You're also modeling. You're also texturing when the need comes. Character art. So this is a really highly sought after role, I find, in games. A lot of people, especially a lot of people that are just start studying, will be really kind of focused on characters. And I can't blame them, because I was the same way. I was really focused on wanting to get into characters. The thing with character art, just so that you guys know, as far as a AAA studio is concerned, for a large studio, you'll have a very, very small section of people actually working on characters in a studio. In our studio, for example, we might have maybe 10 to 15 people max of the 640 that are actually character artists. So I'm just telling you guys this because sometimes it's very difficult, and I don't want to send the wrong message, but sometimes it's very difficult for a junior artist to try to break into the industry as a character artist. It might be better, and we've had people do this, my previous students actually, who come in as environment artists or as modelers and texture artists, express an interest in character art, get mentored by a senior character artist, and then move into a character role later on. That might be a better play for you guys if that's something you're interested in. But as far as character goes, you'll be doing gear. You'll be doing, depending on what your game has, you have a customization option, like Destiny, for example. You might be doing a bunch of gear for the character for 6 months or 8 months. You might not even be working on the character anatomy. You'll be doing the gear, the weapons, stuff like that, stuff that is associated with the actual character. So animation, rigging, and technical, I kind of group these. You can really go, you can do a full presentation on any one of these. I just grouped them because it's not my specialty, although, funny enough, when I went to school for game development, I specialized in animation, and then I ended up going into the art field. But this is, again, another, another subset of game development that, if it's your specialty, I mean, we have a huge animation department, both gameplay and cinematics. Gameplay deals with minute-to-minute gameplay, attack animations, runs, walks. The character can climb, he can duck, he can vault. Cinematics is more high fidelity. You're working in set camera angles, so you have to really make it look good for that specific camera angle. Rigging as well, and again, if you're working in indie, you might be doing all of these, right? Because there's 10 people on your team, and that's your whole studio, right? So sometimes doing that, you really kind of build a lot of really solid skills that can lend themselves well to AAA later on, if that's what you choose. But in our studio, animation, rigging are kept separate. Technical, we have different types of technical artists. So we have technical environment artists, technical character artists, technical animation, and these are people who are, again, if you have a character customization feature in your game, Starlink, for example, we have the ships where. If you guys seen the announcement at E3, you have the ships where you can plug these things and dynamically you see on screen your ship actually gets equipped with these pieces. If you haven't seen it, it's a really cool. There's a really cool gameplay demo online. You should check it out. But that needed a technical artist that's specifically focused on making sure that that works perfectly. So his sole focus or her sole focus is making sure that that works perfectly. So you can have people really specialized characters making sure that when you swap a hat, that the hat appears on the character in the proper spot, all the hats work correctly, they're all tuned correctly, that sort of thing. Lighting and effects, again, and these are things where, at George Brown, for example, we don't have a specific lighting and effects course yet. We have lighting and effects as part of our larger game dev course where I might do a class or two on lighting in Unreal or effects in Unreal, but these are things that people specialize in, and this is what they do for 3 years of a project. They're working on the lighting for the game for 3 years of a project. They're working on the effects of the game for 3 years. So it's really hard to give it the time that it needs in a course. But if this is something that you're interested in, again, let's chat, because I can point you to some resources of really cool online portfolios, or give you ideas as to how you can structure your portfolio so that it's more catered towards effects or lighting. And then, one of the really big things right now that is emerging in games is UI art. UI art has always been a thing, but now it's a huge thing, because we talk about UI and UX, right? And many of you know what this is. One is, the actual graphics, the front end, what does it look like? And the other is, what does it play like? What does it feel like? What do I want to do when I get to this screen? What do I want to do when I get to that screen? That's the user experience end, right? On this, it's the actual visual integration. So this is the UI artist. What is it? And if you look at a game like Division, the UI in Division is so crucial to the actual experience of the game. Same thing with Destiny. The actual UI, the front end, is so crucial to how you feel about the game that sometimes we'll have teams of 20 people that are just focused on UI, which is crazy, right? Because that would be 2 or 3 small indie full teams, and you have those people just focused on UI. So again, another specialization where if this is something that you're interested in, or you've always been interested in graphics or 2D UI navigation, stuff like that, let's chat, because I can point you to some resources for this. So what makes a successful portfolio? And I have some portfolio classes with at George Brown and some of the other colleges that I teach at. And these are presentations that I've vetted with a bunch of people at Ubisoft, our art directors and our art teams. So these are things that I feel like are really broadly generic, good things to kind of touch on when you're working on your portfolio. Focus on your strengths, obviously, right? So if you're someone who is really strong at creating environments, creating models, textures, and stuff like that, don't feel like you need to spice your portfolio up with some vehicles or some weapons or some characters just so that you have a broad range. Just focus on what you're really good at. Focus on what got you to this point. Focus on what you're interested in, because that's going to show in your portfolio. You don't need to have 20, 30 different things in your portfolio. You can focus on 3 to 5 really, really strong pieces in your portfolio and just make those shine. Also, gear your portfolio to the company you're applying to. So if you're interested in working for a company like Blizzard, for example, right, you're not going to necessarily want to have ultra-realistic pieces in your portfolio because that doesn't really do anything for them. They work on stylized games. They work on World of Warcraft. They work on Overwatch. They work on stylized games. So you're going to want to make sure that you have pieces there that reflect what Blizzard does. And if you're applying to a company like Ubisoft, you want to have stuff that is going to be geared towards what Ubisoft does, so they can see that right away and say, okay, you can plug right into production, and you won't take a hit at all. Put only your best work. I mean, it's really hard because as artists, we're as designers, as creatives, we're so attached to what we make. Like it's very difficult for us to get used to receiving feedback that may not be what you want to hear. But I try to instill this in people and in my students specifically, is just when I see something for the first time and I give you feedback, take that feedback as, okay, this is someone who has no vested interest in what they just looked at. This is what they said when they first saw it. That's their first impression. What does that mean, right? So you want to definitely filter out some of that feedback because some of the feedback that you're getting may be from the wrong person. It may be from someone who is not really it's not really clear to them what you're trying to pursue. But just make sure that in your portfolio you're only putting what is your best work and the work that you've gotten feedback from some of the people that you look up to that can really make your portfolio as strong as it can possibly be when you're applying. Include examples that show understanding of tech. So whether you have a programming portfolio, a portfolio for texturing, modeling, and stuff like that, you want to show breakdowns that shows your technical understanding of what you're making. Texture flats, for example. This is an example of one of my old colleagues who, these are just very basic props, right? These are props that we do in our curriculum as, these are some of the first props that we ever modeled, like a TV, a chair. These are things that are not very complex. But because of the setup here, because of just, all these props are at the same level of quality. So instead of displaying 5 different pages in your portfolio with, here's a TV and 20 screenshots of my TV, here's one simple screenshot. I know it's a really simple prop. Here's a screenshot of all my props laid out. They're all consistent level of quality. You know the quality that I'm able to hit, and then we can move on. Tell a story with every piece, and take the time to work on presentation. This is so important, is make your presentation, spend as much time on your presentation, rather, than you did on your actual modeling and texturing of the piece. Spend as much time on the final end product as you did on your full piece. So in this example here, imagine this character was just in a black background, like this, in a T-pose, right? Far, far less interesting piece. Far less interesting piece. This is a very well modeled character, right? It hasn't been textured. Maybe they were just doing this as an exercise or for practice. Instead of just showing a T-pose, just a very, very boring vanilla presentation, instead they put a strong directional light coming towards the character's face. They pose the character like he's shielding his face from the sunlight, and they just model these very simple props with a photo in the background that's blurred. Like the presentation here is A+. Like they've turned this from a pretty good character piece to a solid portfolio piece. So it's just take the time to work on your presentation. And there's another example here. When I look at portfolios all the time, I always see vehicles, airplanes, and I see like a turnaround. I see 20 screenshots of that airplane, and it's like, cool, you can model an airplane. But in this case here, it's the presentation. The camera is the airplane is just simply duplicated. The camera is put from inside the cockpit, looking at the airplane that he modeled, right? So it just got very creative with the presentation. Now you can show me 4 or 5 different screenshots of the technical breakdown. You've already sold me with the first shot, right? So like, again, that first impression, like you really want to make sure that you put as much effort on that, because when someone sees it for the first time, you're gonna grab them, right? So then you can start to sell them on your technical aptitude, because in the beginning, you'll lose them, right? People have seen this 1,000 times. Be ambitious, and again, just like the previous ones, demonstrate some creativity. Like that lightsaber, for example, super simple prop. Many of you can, I'm positive, can model and texture that to the equal level of quality. It's just a simple lightsaber, right? It won't do much for your portfolio. But in this case here, the lightsaber is partially, and it's kind of hard to see on the screen here, but it's partially covered with cloth as if it was being worked on. There's some gears. It's on boxes of like nuts and bolts as if this thing was being put together or repaired. So they've told a little story with a very simple prop. Turned it from a so-so piece into a really good portfolio piece. And fully realized set pieces, these are some previous students' work that are now working at Ubisoft. And this was like a little detective's office. It was part of something we call the Next Showcase, which was a competition for modeling, texture artists, concept artists. We opened it up to programming and animation as well this year. But this was the winner's piece, which was basically this little detective's office. And if you see some of the videos and the other screenshots, because we gave everybody like a little paragraph explanation of what the backstory is here. And you know, on the documents, there was the names of the people that we listed in the story. There was you know, evidence of things that kind of told a larger story that was in, like most people won't get that, but the fact that they put that attention to detail in there, they wowed us with the first shots. And then as I'm looking, I'm like, I know this person definitely tucked some hidden stuff in here somewhere. So as we're looking at the screenshots, we notice all these little details. That's really cool. Like, that tells me that you have that kind of attention to detail. You're able to really sell something, but it also has substance, right? So now we get to how to have a successful game jam. So these are just, you know, a few simple pointers that I think are, you know, mostly no-brainers, but it's still good to kind of go over and just remind you. So first of all is find your hook, okay? What's your hook? What's the one thing where if you're stuck in an elevator with somebody and you have 15 seconds, what's the hook of your game? Like how are you going to explain that to somebody in 15 seconds, right? So I'll tell you a bit of backstory about this, which is really interesting. This game was created, the creative director for this game was a guy named Patrick Plord, who, this is a Ubisoft title, and Patrick Plord is a creative director at Ubi. He worked on Far Cry 3. He was a creative director on Far Cry 3. And by the way, all this information that I'm saying is from his Montreal International Game Summit talk. So I may not have all the details 100%, so I'm going to be paraphrasing a bit. But after he was finished Far Cry 3, he was on that for so long, he didn't want to work on any more violent games. He didn't want to work on a violent game. He's had enough of, for a little while, he wanted a break from violent games, okay? He also just worked on Far Cry 3 for like 3 straight years, and he just had a girl, like he had a little baby girl. So he knew he wanted to do something different, and because of the work that he put into Far Cry 3, he kind of got you know, a semi-blank check from the company to, okay, work on whatever you want to work on and then pitch it to us, and then we'll see what we can do with this. All he knew in the beginning was he wanted a female lead, and he wanted it to look like you're playing a watercolor painting. That's it. So if he was to pitch this to somebody, it was, you're playing a watercolor painting as a female lead. That was his hook. From there, they started to prototype it. Has anyone seen any videos of Child of Light at all? Or played Child of Light? It's an excellent game. It's super cheap. It's only a couple bucks to buy. But it's beautiful, right? And at the time, they didn't have a big team, right? They didn't have a huge team. They had some artists that were concept artists. So instead of going out and trying to make a big 3D AAA game, they focused on the strengths of their core team. They had about 5 or 6 people in the beginning, concept artists mostly, and they just worked on, okay, what are the strengths here? Let's make a watercolor painting. It's all going to be 2D. It's going to be beautifully painted. It used the same engine that Rayman was created in, the UB Art framework, and it became an RPG. And some of the early tech prototypes was the flowy hair. So the heroine is you know, has this flowy hair that reacts to physics. So if you jump this way and you jump that way, almost like it's moving in water. And the early prototypes were like these 3 kind of squares that were working with physics. So as the player would go this way, and the player almost looked like you know, just like a simple box moving around the screen, but they had these boxes that represented hair that would flow as they moved this way and that way. So that was kind of the early prototype that ended up becoming Child of Light. So it's like, you know, find your hook. What's your hook? Like the game that you're going to work on right now or that you're going to collaborate on, what's that thing that you can excite somebody with? Like they can kind of see the end result just by you saying you're playing in a watercolor painting as a female lead, right? So what's your hook? Also start small and dream big. So this is another game that was worked on by a colleague of mine named Adam Brommel, who I used to work with at UB Toronto, who's also one of the co-founders of Polycount. Some of you artists here might know about Polycount, who now formed his own studio. He was working on this kind of as he was working at UB, and that's another cool thing that UB was really supportive about him working on his own project on the side, and he was totally open about it. But this, in the beginning, for those who haven't played this, you're basically a space miner, and you go from planet to planet, and you're mining the planets for resources, and you're setting up a colony on a planet. But in the beginning, it wasn't that, right? It wasn't that. They had a simple prototype of this little icon here that allows you to mine a planet. Like, so you had just basic terrain, and you can carve holes in the terrain with it. That's all they had in the beginning, right? So that's their small prototype, their small idea. Then you start packing clay onto it, and you start carving out what this is going to be. You don't have to have this elaborate design planned out for whatever it is you guys are making right now. Start small. What's the cool thing that makes your project unique? What's that little gem that you guys have that you can start carving into a diamond? You don't have to have this big thing in the beginning, right? It's that small thing that, when someone looks at it, they can dream for you. Like, they can see, oh wow, this can be that, this can be. As soon as you start hearing that about your project, you know you're going in the right direction. Okay, so when you guys start working on your games for the game jam, as soon as you start hearing that from people, that's a good sense that you're in the right direction. Once people start dreaming for you. And also, have fun. You're not gonna, nothing is gonna come out of what you're making that is of any value to you or that you're going to be happy with if you're not having fun. Collaborate. Just what is it that excites you? What is it that interests you, right? At the end of the day, we're just having fun. We're having fun. Whether we make something or not, we're meeting people, we're networking. Now you guys are going to know people from Toronto, and people are going to know from Toronto are going to know people from all over the world. We're networking. We're just kind of exploring. Maybe we'll get a gem out of this. Maybe we don't. At the end of the day, let's just have fun. Let's just have fun, and let's just explore ideas. Let's collaborate, and let's network. Okay? That's it.
Thanks, Billy. And so let's have fun and create team. There are many people that are without a team right now. How many are without a team? Oh. A few. Okay. We have a mixed team from Toronto and Milan. Have we? Yeah. Oh, that's nice. You have a name? Not yet. Okay. So. What?
Our team name is Outside In.
Outside In. Oh, that's cool. I like it. But okay, so we can go and start creating the magic. Thanks, Billy. Very inspiring. And I think that this lesson from Bill is useful for the second step of the camp, that is presenting the art Bible, the art book. So take inspiration about how to present. I think the most important tips that you gave is focus on the idea and present idea using your creativity, and not see only a detail, but see always a big picture of what you have done. So if you can present in that way, it arrives. And if arrives and create the dream, you are on the good way. So thanks, Billy. Very interesting. And we can go and start creating things. Thank you.